What if less could create more? Why do some efforts produce huge results? Why does most of your hard work sometimes create very little? What if a small part of what you do is responsible for most of your results? Could finding that small part change the way you work? Welcome to this complete educational summary of the 80-20 principle by Richard Koch. But can we really learn to identify what matters most? Can the 80-20 principle help us use our time, energy, and effort more intelligently? And what practical solutions can this book offer? We will discover the answers across 4 sessions. In Session 1, what exactly is the 80-20 principle, and why can a small number of causes create a large share of results? In Session 2, how can we identify the activities, people, decisions, and efforts that create the greatest value? In Session 3, how can we apply 80-20 thinking to productivity, work, business, and everyday decisions? And in Session 4, how can we bring everything together and use the principle more wisely in real life? What if your biggest opportunity is hidden inside the small things you are currently overlooking? Stay until the end. Because the most important question may be this: what should you stop doing so you can focus on what truly matters? Session 1. What if most of your results are coming from only a small part of your effort? Think about your daily life. You may have dozens of tasks. You may spend hours working. You may have a long list of responsibilities. But are all those activities producing the same level of results? Probably not. This is where the central idea of the 80-20 principle by Richard Koch begins. The basic idea is that, in many situations, a relatively small number of causes can be responsible for a disproportionately large share of the results. The famous example is the 80-20 relationship. Roughly 20% of causes may produce roughly 80% of effects. But there is an important point. The numbers 80 and 20 should not be treated as a universal mathematical rule. The actual relationship can be different depending on the situation. The deeper lesson is about imbalance. Results are often not distributed equally. A small number of activities may create far more value than the rest. A small number of customers may generate a large share of a business's revenue. A small number of products may contribute most of a company's profits. A small number of tasks may create most of your meaningful progress. And a small number of decisions may have a much greater impact on your future than hundreds of ordinary choices. Once you understand this possibility, an important question appears. Are you spending most of your time on the things that create the most value? Imagine a student who has 5 hours available to study. They spend the first hour organizing notes. The second hour watching unrelated educational videos. The third hour repeatedly reading material they already understand. The fourth hour checking messages. And only the final hour practicing the difficult topics that actually determine their understanding. They worked for 5 hours. But their effort was not equally valuable. A better approach would be to identify the areas where focused study produces the greatest improvement. The same idea applies to work. Imagine someone running a small business. They answer emails, update documents, attend meetings, check social media, organize files, and perform dozens of other activities. But perhaps only a few activities are responsible for most of the business's growth. Finding those activities could be more valuable than simply working longer hours. This leads to one of the most important lessons of 80-20 thinking. Do not automatically assume that more effort creates proportionally more results. Sometimes the relationship is very different. 1 hour spent on the right activity can be more valuable than several hours spent on low-impact work. This does not mean that hard work is useless. It means that direction matters. Effort without priority can produce limited results. So how do you discover your high-value activities? Start by looking at your results. Ask: which activities have produced the biggest improvements? Which tasks have created the most useful outcomes? Which customers, projects, subjects, or responsibilities matter most? Which activities repeatedly consume time without producing meaningful results? These questions can reveal patterns. You may discover that a small number of actions are responsible for much of your progress. And once you identify those actions, you can consider giving them more attention. This is where 80/20th thinking becomes practical. It is not simply a statement about numbers. It is a way of examining cause and effect. Instead of asking only, "How much am I doing?" ask, "What results am I getting from what I am doing?" That question changes the focus from activity to effectiveness. Another important lesson is that not everything deserves equal attention. Imagine you have 10 tasks. Completing all 10 may feel satisfying. But perhaps 2 of them are responsible for most of the progress toward your goal. If you spend your best energy on the other 8 simply because they are easier, you may finish the day feeling productive without making the progress you actually wanted. This is why identifying priorities matters. It is similar to the principle we explored in the one thing. But 80/20 thinking adds another useful question. Which small group of actions is producing the largest share of my results? The answer can help you decide where to concentrate. However, we should be careful not to misuse the principle. The 80/20 principle does not mean that you should ignore everything except exactly 20% of your activities. It does not mean that every situation will produce an exact 80/20th split. And it does not mean that the remaining 80% is automatically useless. Some activities may be necessary even if they do not produce immediate measurable results. Family responsibilities, preparation, maintenance, learning, rest, and other important areas cannot always be reduced to a simple percentage. The principle is a tool for thinking, not a law that overrides context. Another useful idea is to look for leverage. Leverage means that a relatively small input can produce a much larger effect. For example, improving one important process may save time across many future tasks. Learning one valuable skill may improve many areas of your work. Fixing one recurring problem may prevent hundreds of smaller problems later. Finding one effective method may make future efforts easier. These are examples of why identifying high-impact actions matters. Instead of constantly asking, "How can I work harder?" you can also ask, "How can I make my effort more effective?" This question can lead to better systems. It can also help reduce wasted effort. Consider your own daily routine. How much time goes toward activities that genuinely move you forward? How much goes toward things that simply keep you occupied? There is nothing wrong with necessary small tasks. But if low-value activities consume most of your available energy, they can leave little room for high-value work. This is why awareness comes first. Before changing your routine, observe it. Track what you do. Look at what results those activities produce. Then search for patterns. Perhaps you discover that a few study methods create most of your learning. Perhaps a few types of content create most of your audience engagement. Perhaps a few clients create most of your business value. Perhaps a few habits have the greatest effect on your daily life. Once you see the pattern, you have information you can use. The next step is not necessarily to work more. It may be to work differently. Give more attention to what works. Reduce unnecessary effort where appropriate. Improve the activities that create meaningful results. And continue measuring the outcome. This is the heart of 80/20 thinking. Results are often uneven. Efforts are often uneven. Value is often uneven. And recognizing that imbalance can help you make better decisions. So before moving forward, ask yourself 4 simple questions. What are my most important results? Which activities create most of those results? Which activities consume my time without creating much value? And what would happen if I gave more attention to the small number of actions that matter most? The answers may reveal that you do not necessarily need more time. You may need better priorities. You may not need to work harder. You may need to identify where your effort has the greatest impact. And that is only the beginning. In Session 2, we will go deeper into how to identify these high-value areas and how 80-20 thinking can change the way you approach time, productivity, decisions, and the activities that deserve your attention most. Session 2. What if the biggest improvement in your life could come from identifying what matters most? In the first session, we explored the basic idea behind the 80-20 principle. Results are often unevenly distributed, and a relatively small number of causes can sometimes create a much larger share of the outcome. Now the important question is: how do you actually find those high-value causes? The first step is to stop looking only at how busy you are. Look at the results. Suppose you are studying several subjects. You may spend the same amount of time on each one, but perhaps one subject requires much more attention because it has a greater effect on your overall performance. Or imagine a business with many products. Some products may sell occasionally, while a smaller group may generate most of the revenue. The useful question is not simply, what am I doing? It is, which of the things I am doing are creating the greatest results? That shift can completely change the way you analyze your time and effort. Start with evidence. Look at your past results. Which activities produced your biggest improvements? Which projects created the most value? Which customers contributed most to the business? Which habits made the greatest difference? Which tasks repeatedly consumed time but produced very little? You are looking for patterns. The 80-20 principle is useful because it encourages you to search for these patterns instead of assuming that everything has equal importance. Consider a simple example. Imagine you spend 10 hours working on different tasks. 2 hours produce an important result. 8 hours are spent on smaller activities that have limited impact. If you only look at the total 10 hours, you might conclude that you need to work harder. But if you examine the results, you may discover that the 2 high-value hours deserve more attention. The solution may not be adding more hours. It may be increasing the amount of time you spend on the activities that actually matter. This is where the idea of leverage becomes important. Some actions have consequences far beyond the time required to complete them. A small improvement in an important process can save time repeatedly. Learning a useful skill can improve many future tasks. Solving a recurring problem can prevent the same problem from appearing again. Building a strong relationship can create opportunities that continue over time. These are examples of high-leverage activities. But leverage is not always obvious. Sometimes you have to experiment. Try an approach. Measure the result. Compare it with alternatives. Then decide whether the activity deserves more attention. This is better than assuming that something is valuable simply because it looks impressive. Another important concept is simplicity. When people want better results, they often add more. More tools. More tasks. More meetings. More strategies. More information. But adding more does not automatically create more value. Sometimes improvement comes from removing what is unnecessary. Ask yourself, what can I eliminate? What can I simplify? What can I stop doing? What can I reduce without damaging the result? These questions can reveal hidden opportunities. Imagine someone spends hours every week checking multiple platforms for information that rarely affects their decisions. Reducing that activity could create more time for something valuable. Or imagine a business using a complicated process for a simple task. Simplifying the process could save time for everyone involved. It can also be about doing less of the unnecessary. This leads to another important distinction. Efficiency versus effectiveness. Efficiency asks, how can I do this task faster? Effectiveness asks, Should I be spending my time on this task at all? The second question can be more powerful. There is little benefit in becoming extremely efficient at something that produces almost no meaningful value. First, choose the right activity. Then improve how you perform it. Another area where this principle can help is decision-making. When faced with many choices, you can ask which decisions have the greatest consequences. Not every decision deserves the same amount of mental energy. Some decisions have long-term effects. Others are easily reversible. Some deserve careful thought. Others can be made quickly. Recognizing this difference can help you avoid spending too much time on decisions that have very little impact. The same idea applies to goals. Suppose you have 5 goals. Trying to give all 5 equal attention may divide your energy. Instead, examine which goal has the greatest importance or creates the greatest positive effect on other areas. Perhaps improving one skill helps you perform several other responsibilities better. Perhaps completing one important project opens the door to several future opportunities. That goal may deserve greater attention. This does not mean abandoning everything else. It means recognizing differences in importance. Another useful idea is to identify your vital few without assuming that the exact percentage must always be 20%. The real question is, which relatively small group is responsible for a disproportionately large share of the result? The answer could be 10%, 30%, or another proportion. The numbers are less important than the pattern. This is why you should use the principle as a way of investigating reality rather than forcing reality to fit a formula. Data can help. If you are creating content, examine which videos perform best. If you are studying, examine which methods produce the strongest understanding. If you are working, examine which activities produce the most meaningful outcomes. If you are managing your time, examine where your hours actually go. Then compare effort with results. You may discover surprising differences. An activity that consumes a lot of time may create little value. Another activity that takes relatively little time may create a much larger result. That discovery can change your priorities. But there is also a danger. You should not judge everything only by immediate results. Some valuable activities produce benefits slowly. Education may take years to show its full effect. Building trust can take time. Maintaining important relationships may not create a measurable result every day. Preparation may appear unproductive until the moment it becomes necessary. So the 80-20 principle should be applied with context and common sense. Do not eliminate something simply because its value is difficult to measure. Instead, ask what role it plays and whether its long-term contribution matters. The goal is not to become obsessed with percentages. The goal is to become more aware of where value comes from. Once you begin thinking this way, your daily routine can look different. Instead of asking, "How can I fit more tasks into my day?" you may ask, "Which tasks deserve more of my best energy?" Instead of, "How can I work longer?" you may ask, "How can I create greater results with the effort I already have?" And instead of, "What else should I add?" you may ask, "What can I remove?" These questions can lead to better priorities. They can also create more room for meaningful work. So take a moment and examine your own life. Look at your goals. Look at your time. Look at your activities. Look at your results. Then search for the imbalance. Where is a small amount of effort creating a large result? Where is a large amount of effort creating very little? Those differences contain information. And once you understand them, you can make more intentional choices about where your attention belongs. In Session 3, we will take this idea further and explore how the 80-20 principle can be applied to productivity, work, business, and everyday decisions, and how you can turn this way of thinking into practical action. Session 3. What if you could achieve better results without simply adding more hours to your day? That is where 80-20 thinking becomes practical. In the previous sessions, we learned that results are often unevenly distributed. A relatively small number of actions can sometimes create a disproportionately large share of the outcome. Now we can take that idea into everyday life. Start with productivity. Many people define productivity as doing as many tasks as possible. But a better question is, which tasks actually create meaningful results? Imagine you have a list of 20 things to complete. Some are urgent. Some are easy. Some are routine. And perhaps only a few have a major effect on your most important goal. If you spend your best energy completing the easy tasks simply because they are satisfying, you may finish a lot without making much progress. 80-20's thinking encourages you to look for the activities with the greatest impact. This can change the way you organize your day. Instead of beginning with everything that needs to be done, identify the few activities that matter most. Then give those activities your strongest attention. This does not mean ignoring necessary responsibilities. It means understanding that not every task deserves equal priority. Another useful principle is to identify your strongest sources of value. For a business, this might mean identifying which products, customers, services, or activities create the greatest contribution. For a student, it might mean identifying which study methods produce the strongest understanding. For a content creator, it might mean examining which topics, formats, or creative decisions produce the best results. For personal development, it might mean identifying the habits that have the greatest positive influence on your life. The exact answer depends on the situation. The method is the same. Observe. Compare. Identify patterns. Then concentrate where the impact is greatest. This is much more reliable than simply assuming that every activity has equal value. Another important area is time. Time is limited. Everyone receives the same number of hours in a day, but those hours do not necessarily create equal results. 1 hour spent learning an important skill may have more long-term value than several hours spent on low-priority activities. One focused conversation may solve a problem that has been consuming attention for weeks. One improvement to a recurring process may save time repeatedly. This is why time management is not only about scheduling. It is also about understanding value. Ask yourself, what is my time actually producing? That question can reveal opportunities to change your routine. You may discover that some activities can be reduced. Some can be automated. Some can be delegated when appropriate. Some can be grouped together. And some may simply need to be stopped. But eliminating activities should be done carefully. Not everything with low immediate output is useless. Rest has value. Relationships have value. Learning has value. Preparation has value. Some important things produce benefits slowly. The purpose of 80-20 thinking is not to turn life into a spreadsheet. It is to help you recognize where disproportionate value exists. Now consider decision-making. Not every decision deserves the same amount of attention. Some choices have very small consequences. Others can affect your life for years. A simple everyday choice may be reversible. A major educational, career, financial, or personal decision may require much more careful thought. So one practical application of 80-20 thinking is to identify the decisions with the greatest consequences and give them the appropriate amount of attention. This can prevent a common problem: spending too much mental energy on small decisions while rushing through major ones. Another area is learning. Information is everywhere. You can read hundreds of articles, watch countless videos, and collect endless notes. But information alone does not guarantee understanding. A smaller number of concepts may explain a large part of what you need to know. So ask, what are the most important ideas in this subject? What knowledge will help me understand everything else? What should I practice rather than simply read? This approach can make learning more focused. The goal is not to learn less. It is to identify the knowledge with the greatest usefulness. The same principle can apply to skills. Suppose you want to become better at communication. You could study dozens of techniques. But perhaps a few fundamentals create most of the improvement. Listening carefully. Speaking clearly. Asking useful questions. Understanding the other person's perspective. Practicing consistently. Mastering the fundamentals may create more value than collecting endless advanced techniques. This is another form of the vital few idea. A small number of fundamentals can sometimes support a much larger set of skills. Now think about business. A company may have hundreds of activities. But some activities directly create revenue or customer value, while others mainly support those activities. Understanding this difference can help a business decide where to invest resources. For example, if a company discovers that a small group of customers generates a large share of its revenue, it may want to understand why those customers are valuable. Are they buying a particular product? Do they value a particular service? Are they responding to a particular experience? The goal is not to automatically ignore everyone else. It is to understand where the strongest value is coming from. The same thinking can be applied to products. If a small number of products consistently generate most of the sales, that pattern deserves investigation. What makes those products successful? Can the useful characteristics be improved? Can similar value be created elsewhere? This is how a simple observation can lead to better strategy. Another important idea is experimentation. You do not always know in advance which activity will create the greatest result. So test. Try something. Measure the outcome. Compare it with alternatives. Then learn from the evidence. This is particularly useful when making decisions under uncertainty. Instead of asking, "What is guaranteed to work?" you can ask, "What can I test at a reasonable cost to learn what works better?" This mindset reduces the need for perfect predictions. It turns uncertainty into something you can investigate. However, there is an important warning. 80-20 thinking should never become an excuse for careless shortcuts. High-impact activities still require quality. If you focus only on speed, you may damage important relationships, reduce quality, or create new problems. Likewise, focusing on a small number of customers does not mean treating other customers poorly. Focusing on important goals does not mean ignoring legitimate responsibilities. Efficiency must be balanced with responsibility. The principle should help you use resources wisely, not encourage you to become careless. Another useful application is personal energy. Your energy changes. There may be periods when you think more clearly and periods when you feel tired. If possible, use your strongest periods for work that requires deep concentration. Save simpler tasks for times when your energy is lower. Again, this is not about working constantly. Rest is part of maintaining sustainable performance. You cannot expect high-quality focus without allowing your mind and body appropriate recovery. Now consider your goals. Suppose you want to improve several areas of life at once. You might want better grades, a new skill, improved finances, stronger relationships, and a new project. All of these goals may be worthwhile. But trying to give them identical attention can divide your resources. Instead, ask, which improvement would create the greatest positive effect right now? Perhaps improving your study routine makes several other goals easier. Perhaps learning a specific skill creates new opportunities. Perhaps solving a financial problem removes a major source of stress. The answer depends on your circumstances. The important part is recognizing that priorities are not equal. This brings us to a powerful practical formula. Find what creates the greatest value. Give it appropriate attention. Reduce unnecessary effort. Measure the results. Then adjust. That is 80/20th thinking in action. You do not need to calculate an exact percentage every day. You need to develop the habit of searching for disproportionate results. Ask where the greatest value comes from. Ask where your effort is being wasted. Ask what can be simplified. Ask what should receive more attention. And ask what should receive less. Once you begin thinking this way, productivity becomes less about filling your schedule and more about directing your resources. Your time. Your energy. Your attention. Your skills. Your money. Your effort. All of these are limited. So using them intentionally matters. And in the final session, we will bring the entire idea together. We will look at the biggest lessons from the 80/20 principle, how to apply them without blindly following percentages, and how to build a practical approach to focusing on the activities that create the greatest meaningful value in your life. Session 4, Final Conclusion. We have now reached the final session of our journey through the 80/20 principle by Richard Koch. Before we finish, let's bring everything together. What have we learned so far? In Session 1, we discovered the central idea behind the 80/20 principle: results are often unevenly distributed. A relatively small number of causes can sometimes produce a disproportionately large share of the results. We learned that the exact numbers do not have to be 80 and 20. The deeper lesson is to look for imbalance and discover where the greatest value is actually coming from. Then, in Session 2, we went deeper. We explored how to identify high-value activities by looking at evidence, comparing effort with results, finding patterns, and asking better questions. Instead of simply asking, "How busy am I?" we learned to ask, "What results is my effort producing?" That question changes the entire perspective. We also explored the importance of simplicity. Sometimes improvement does not come from adding more tasks, more tools, or more strategies. Sometimes it comes from removing what is unnecessary. We asked, what can be eliminated? What can be simplified? What can be reduced? And what deserves more attention? Then, in Session 3, we moved from understanding the principle to applying it. We explored productivity, time, learning, business, decision-making, personal energy, and goal setting. We learned that not every task deserves equal attention. Some actions can have a much greater impact than others. That means productivity is not simply about completing more tasks. It is about directing your limited resources toward meaningful results. Now let's bring these lessons into one simple idea. Your time is limited. Your energy is limited. Your attention is limited. Your resources are limited. So the goal should not always be to do more. The goal is to understand where your resources create the greatest value. Imagine you have a limited amount of time available each day. You could divide it equally across every possible activity. Or you could examine which activities actually move your most important goals forward and give them greater attention. That is the mindset behind 80/20 thinking. But there is an important distinction. The 80/20 principle is not a magic formula. It does not guarantee that exactly 20% of your effort will always create exactly 80% of your results. Real life is more complicated. The proportions can change. Some activities may produce immediate results. Others may produce value slowly. Some responsibilities may be difficult to measure. And some things are important even when their value cannot be expressed as a number. For example, relationships, rest, learning, preparation, and personal responsibilities may not always produce obvious short-term results. That does not make them worthless. This is why the principle should be used as a thinking tool rather than a rigid rule. Its purpose is to help you investigate where value comes from. Consider your own life. Look at your goals. Look at your schedule. Look at your habits. Look at your work. Then ask. Where are my strongest results coming from? Which activities create the greatest progress? Which activities consume significant time but create little value? What could I simplify? What could I stop doing? What deserves more of my attention? These questions can reveal opportunities. Perhaps you discover that one particular study method produces most of your learning. Perhaps one type of project creates most of your professional progress. Perhaps a small number of habits have the greatest influence on your daily life. Perhaps a few important relationships deserve more time and care. The purpose is not to immediately make extreme changes. First, observe. Then understand. Then make thoughtful adjustments. This is one of the most useful aspects of the 80-20 mindset. It encourages curiosity. Instead of assuming that every effort has the same value, you investigate. You look at results. You identify patterns. You test ideas. And you learn. This can also change the way you think about failure. Suppose an approach produces weak results. Instead of simply working harder, ask why. Was the activity actually important? Was the method effective? Was the goal clear? Was the timing wrong? Was there a better use of your resources? Sometimes failure is not evidence that you need more effort. It may be evidence that you need a better approach. This is an important distinction. Working harder can be useful when the direction is correct. But when the direction is wrong, additional effort can simply increase wasted effort. That is why effectiveness comes before efficiency. First choose the right direction. Then improve the way you move in that direction. Another lesson is that high-value activities deserve protection. Once you identify what matters most, distractions can become easier to recognize. You can ask whether a new request, task, or opportunity supports your current priorities. If it does, it may deserve attention. If it does not, you can decide whether it should be postponed, reduced, delegated when appropriate, or declined. This does not mean becoming rigid. Life changes. Circumstances change. Priorities change. The important thing is to review them regularly. What mattered 6 months ago may not be the most important thing today. Your responsibilities may have changed. Your goals may have changed. Your understanding may have changed. So your high-value activities can change too. This is why 80-20 thinking is not a one-time exercise. It can become an ongoing habit of observation. Every so often, stop and ask. Is my effort producing the results I want? If not, what needs to change? This simple reflection can prevent you from continuing ineffective patterns simply because they have become familiar. There is also a powerful lesson about simplicity. Modern life often rewards complexity. We collect more information. We use more tools. We create more plans. We add more commitments. But complexity can consume attention. Sometimes the better solution is simpler. One clear goal. A few important actions. A manageable routine. A focused period of work. And regular review. This does not mean every problem has a simple solution. Some problems are genuinely complex. But unnecessary complexity should not be confused with effectiveness. If something can be simplified without damaging quality or responsibility, simplification may create more room for what matters. The same principle applies to learning. You do not need to memorize everything. You need to understand the most important concepts. You do not need to master every possible technique. You need to practice the skills that create meaningful improvement. And you do not need to consume endless information. You need to turn useful information into understanding and action. This brings us back to the central lesson. Value is not always evenly distributed. Some actions matter more. Some decisions matter more. Some habits matter more. Some relationships matter more. Some uses of time matter more. Your job is not to treat everything equally. Your job is to recognize the differences. So what can you do after this video? Start with observation. For the next few days, pay attention to where your time and energy actually go. Write down the major activities. Then compare them with the results they produce. Look for patterns. You may discover something unexpected. Maybe a small activity creates a large result. Maybe a large activity creates very little. Maybe something you thought was important is not as valuable as you assumed. Maybe something you underestimated deserves more attention. Once you have evidence, make one thoughtful adjustment. Do not try to change your entire life in one day. Improve one important activity. Remove one unnecessary distraction. Simplify one process. Protect one valuable block of time. Then observe what happens. Small improvements in the right direction can become meaningful over time. And that is perhaps the most practical way to understand the 80-20 principle. It is not about chasing a perfect percentage. It is about becoming better at recognizing what matters. It is about understanding cause and effect. It is about directing effort toward value. It is about replacing unnecessary activity with meaningful action. And it is about remembering that more is not automatically better. Sometimes better is better. More hours do not automatically create more progress. More tasks do not automatically create more achievement. More information does not automatically create more understanding. More complexity does not automatically create better results. The important question is always: what creates the greatest meaningful value? When you begin asking that question regularly, your decisions can become more intentional. Your schedule can become clearer. Your work can become more focused. Your learning can become more efficient. And your energy can be directed toward the things that genuinely matter. But remember to keep perspective. Life is not only about measurable results. Success is not simply about productivity. A meaningful life also includes relationships, health, rest, values, learning, responsibility, and experiences. Use the 80-20 principle to make better choices, not to reduce your entire life to numbers. And now, our journey comes to an end. We began with a simple question. What if less could create more? We discovered that the answer is not about doing less carelessly. It is about understanding where your effort has the greatest impact. We learn to look beyond busyness. We learn to examine results. We learn to identify high-value activities. We learn to simplify. We learn to protect our attention. We learn to make thoughtful decisions. And most importantly, we learn to question the assumption that everything deserves equal effort. So the next time you look at a long list of tasks, pause. Do not immediately ask, how can I finish everything? Ask, which of these things matters most? And when you find it, ask, what can I do to give this the attention it deserves? That small change in the way you think can lead to better decisions. Not because the number 80-20 magically changes your life. But because learning to recognize where value comes from can change the way you use your limited time, energy, and attention. Thank you for joining me throughout this complete summary of the 80-20 principle. If you remember only one lesson from this entire journey, remember this. Do not measure your life only by how much you do. Pay attention to what your actions create. Find what matters most. Give it your best effort. Remove what unnecessarily consumes your attention. Keep learning from the results. And continue moving forward with greater clarity. Because sometimes, the biggest improvement does not come from doing more. It comes from finally recognizing what matters most. And once you discover that, your next step becomes much clearer. This is where our journey ends. But your opportunity to apply what you have learned begins now.